Hello, and welcome to ICRC HR Updates. My name is Pandy Pridemore, and I'm the Principal Consultant for the Human Resource USA. We're a show that talks about the current topics and trends within human resources. And as you might have guessed, if you haven't been with us before, the world of human resources is constantly changing. It is on a rapid move. And the crazy part is, a lot of the individuals that are doing HR have to have resources and have to have a method by which to stay up on the current labor laws. Well, this show attacks just that. And we try to take it from a national basis. So the conversations we're about to have are serious ones. They're ones that if you are in the role of a human resource professional, we're going to give you things to think about. We're going to give you things to go act on. And my speakers today are veterans to the show. They have been on here a number of times, and I'm excited to have them back. Today, we're going to actually start with Carl Ulrich, and Carl's going to be talking to us about medical marijuana. All the new considerations with the labor law, the labor management and the talent management challenges that we currently have in the market right now. How should we be looking at medical marijuana? Have the rules changed, and should we be actually looking at those registration cards a little bit differently as we look at potential employees? And then the second half of the show, Scott Warwick's back. You know Scott. Scott is going to talk about one of the most controversial conversations on any source of media right now, and that's the critical race theory. And I know that may seem like more of an educational topic, but guess what, guys? It is very much an employment topic. And Scott's going to help us touch on how we take that kind of a political statement and a political movement and work it within the place of employment. I mean, into your workplace. So stay with us. It's going to be a good show. And remember, we're going to bring out things that we want you to write down, talk about with your supervisors, your business owners, things that you can actually act on. So Carl, let's start with you. Thank you so much for finding time to come back.
Thanks, Pandy. I'm glad to be here.
Well, you know, when you and I talked here on the phone here a while back, we started talking about some of the things that we're hearing from our clients in regards to all these struggles to find candidates. They're actually having to start looking out of the box again, as we were 2-3 years ago, and say, all right, how can we make it a little bit easier to get people on? And you even mentioned you've got clients that are not even testing for drugs anymore, or at least marijuana.
That's right. Yeah, and I think as the labor market tightens, it's continuing to tighten. You know, all employers are taking a look at different ways that they can accommodate lifestyles, certain issues that they might not have really spent time thinking about before. They're making choices differently than they used to because of the tight labor market. And one of the ways that happens, and one of the areas in which that happens, is their attitude toward marijuana in particular and employees who use. Now, there are lots of different approaches. This comes up in a lot of different ways, but employers are really doing a fresh look, taking a fresh look at marijuana testing and drug testing generally. Yeah.
Well, and this can be very dangerous in some situations. So break us down and help us understand who's the employer that could comfortably do that, who might want to consider that.
Well, I think you know, one of the considerations always is if you've got positions in your workplace that are safety sensitive positions, or positions involving heavy machinery, or positions where you know, the duties and responsibilities place yourself, the employee, or others at risk, you're obviously going to want to take probably a different view of marijuana usage, and marijuana in particular, than you would if you had an office environment, perhaps, or if you had a internal inward-facing position. So you may look at it differently in those situations. I find I work with a lot of manufacturers, and one of the concerns that they have And they may take a different approach with respect to certain individuals in their office, for one thing, or others than they would for employees working out on the shop floor, driving forklifts, operating heavy machinery, driving trucks. It really does depend upon the work environment that you have. So one size does not fit all in this situation. I think I would break this down really into three general categories of approaches, if you will, to medical marijuana, or marijuana in particular. I think the law always allows zero tolerance. Even under the new Ohio statute, medical marijuana statute, employers can still employ a zero tolerance policy, but they may want to back off of that depending upon their particular needs. But zero tolerance is always an option, and a lot of employers have considered that in the past. Now, as we go forward, other choices have emerged. So one of the ways employers can look at this is a kind of blended approach. The second way to approach marijuana in the workplace is a sort of mixed approach, where you have zero tolerance with respect to, as I said, safety sensitive positions where you could place yourself, the employer, or others at risk if you were under the influence. But other positions not necessarily so strident. You take a much more flexible approach with other categories. So there's a mixed approach. And then you have other employers where, particularly in the non-manufacturing fields, where the positions really don't depend as much on heavy machinery, don't involve as much safety risk within the workplace. And they may take a much more flexible approach and be willing to accommodate medical marijuana across the board. So again, those are sort of the three approaches we've been seeing in some varying degrees of application, but those are basically the three approaches you're going to see. And as time has gone on, as I've been kind of watching this over the years, we're beginning to see more and more employers opt for a more flexible, more accommodating approach to this situation.
It's made everybody stop and think. I think one of the first hurdles they had to get over, the employers, is that this was not a prescription, that this was a recommendation. It is not something that is you pick up at the pharmacy. Obviously, the dispensary is not a pharmacy, but this is a registration. So that kind of changed the game plan a little bit. But when we look at even that, there are some protections in regards to how workers' comp and the EEOC reviews this, correct?
Well, right. I mean, we start always with the Ohio medical marijuana law, and that's where we start. And I've said this to you, Pandy, before. We've talked about this, but the Ohio medical marijuana statute is designed to provide employers with maximum flexibility. It's designed to allow employers to make a whole wide range of choices and approaches toward medical marijuana user status and caregiver status in the workplace. That maximum flexibility is built into the law of Ohio, and employers can adopt any one of those approaches we just talked about, including zero tolerance. So that is built into the law. Now, having said that, there are a couple of other things to think about. Workers' compensation is another area where medical marijuana has a kind of interface with employment law. The Ohio workers' compensation system does not recognize medical marijuana as a proper treatment and is not compensable under the BWC system. So you can't go out and get a medical marijuana recommendation for a workplace injury and have that compensated for under the workers' compensation system. That doesn't work. If you terminate an employee based on a positive marijuana test, or because they violated your zero tolerance policy, even if it's because of medical marijuana and a valid license to use or possess, you still have the right to challenge unemployment compensation on that basis. That rule has not changed. The other thing I'll say is that, in certain positions which are governed by federal law, marijuana, any kind of marijuana, is still a controlled substance and a violation of the law. So if you're subject to Department of Transportation testing regulations, you may have drivers, you may have other individuals who are involved in operating motor vehicles in your workplace. If they're subject to DOT testing and DOT drug testing standards, all bets are off. It doesn't matter whether you get a medical marijuana license. If you pop a positive on a test, the DOT standards kick in, and you are required in that case to treat it as a positive test. So there's a lot of stuff floating around here, but I will say the Ohio statute in particular is designed to provide employers with a lot of flexibility and a lot of choices, and that, as I said, that is by design.
I think you brought up a really good point. I want to kind of interject it here real quick. Federal law says no, which means not only, even if you're not DOT or that sort of an employer, if you have a federal contract, your employees should not be permitted. Can you expound on that?
Well, I mean, you know, federal contracting law is a whole different ballgame, right? But if you are contracting with the federal government, you're obligated in most cases to comply with federal law and federal requirements that are built into those contracts. And in many cases, there would be drug testing requirements, and those drug testing requirements would be built around federal law, not state law. Now, I think in many cases, what we're going to see over time, Pandy, is that because medical marijuana and frankly, even recreational medical marijuana use is becoming more prevalent and more recognized and legal under state law, we're going to see gradually over time some changing in the way the federal regulations and the federal agencies deal with that. We've already seen some of that happen, not so much in the written law, but in how federal agencies address the issue. So as a practical matter. So some of that is going to change, but for now, you're right. You do have to be aware that if you're governed by federal law, if you have federal requirements to comply with, the rules may be very different, and you may be required to take a much harder line on these things.
I thought it was interesting too that a lot of the companies that I've been going in and doing some auditing in regards to their policies have left out medical marijuana in their drug policy. Are you comfortable with that as an attorney, or because I'm not as a consultant, but please correct me if I'm wrong. Should medical marijuana be a part of that drug policy?
I mean, I think if you're going to, regardless of what of those three approaches we talked about, which of those three approaches you take, I think your policy should address the medical marijuana situation. Remember, I think when you have policies and procedures in your handbook, they're designed to manage the expectations of your employees. They're designed to communicate expectations, to provide them with guidance and understanding for what you expect in the workplace. So whether you're going to adopt a zero tolerance policy with respect to medical marijuana, or you're going to be completely open and accommodating to all forms of medical marijuana use, regardless of what approach you adopt as an employer, I think your policy should say that, because this is a topic that is being asked about constantly. Employees, many of them believe things about medical marijuana that aren't true. Many of them believe that employers are taking an approach that they aren't taking. So communication is key. We'd say that in any employment law topic, obviously, but particularly in this area, because I think you've got to be telling your employees how you're going to approach this issue, and you need to do it ahead of time before they get into trouble.
Let's go over the actual testing process, because we've got, at least I've got some clients that are backing up and saying, look, maybe we should just take away the whole marijuana portion of our drug test, and let's just not worry about that. Is that something that an organization can do right in the middle of just pick a day out of the year and decide, okay, all of a sudden now we're not going to start testing? What happens to all the other individuals that we've already passed on that we did not employ, who may have tested positive?
Well, I mean, if you're going to change your policy, you announce it ahead of time. You say, here's the policy, it's going to become effective on date X, and here's how it's changing. In other words, you can't have a clean break. It does create a bit of it can sometimes create confusion. I think that's true. Any policy change, this area, any area where you're changing a commonly accepted, reasonably well understood approach into something else, you're going to have some confusion unless you communicate properly. But I think what I would say about policy changes in particular apply here too. If you're going to change something like this, you want to let people know ahead of time. You want to set a starting date. You want to communicate, here's what the policy is going to look like, and let them know that, you know, there, as of January 1st, the new sheriff's in town, right? Again, I think it's about communication. Yeah, you do have some risk, I suppose, that somebody who may have been treated differently under the prior approach would view that as being discriminatory. But again, that in and of itself, you know, there's no discrimination if you've communicated a policy change in advance and you're making everybody aware of it.
Mm-hmm. You know, medical marijuana is just kind of a quiet topic right now, but because we're talking about it right now, we all know that it's still around and it's not going away. But let's talk about, you used a very key word that we put a lot of emphasis on here on the show, and that's communication. Let's talk about what type of communication we need to have with our supervisors or our interviewing team, because this conversation does come up every so often. I still get individuals who want to know who's had previous workers' comp claims, or, you know, who's had other issues at other employers. Let's talk about what is permitted and what's not permitted here in the state of Ohio in regards to the interviewing process involving medical marijuana.
Well, you are permitted to first of all, let me say that as a general rule, you want to probably keep questions about, you know, medical condition, about workers' compensation, past workers' compensation claims. Those things you keep out of the interviewing process. It's not appropriate to be asking somebody about their medical history. Frankly, it's not appropriate to be asking somebody about the medical history even after you've hired them in most cases. So your interviewing process really needs to be about the job. Are you qualified? What's your employment history? Where have you worked before? You know, all the usual things. You keep the medical stuff out of that. You do have a right, however, in the medical marijuana context specifically, to obtain information about that. And as I said, the Ohio statute provides employers with a lot of flexibility, a lot of protections in this situation. And you can request that if somebody has a medical marijuana license, that they had disclosed that to you at some point. You should probably put that in your policy. You can, as I said, you can approach that however you want to in terms of response, but you have a little more flexibility with respect to medical marijuana specifically than you would with respect to other things like employment history or workers' compensation claims in particular. Those things you want to avoid, particularly in the interviewing process.
Yeah, and I tend to say those are questions that should be held, you know, or handled by the HR person or someone who's been properly trained to not only just ask the question, but also to respond to what answers might come up. Because you never really know what somebody's going to say. They could be somebody who's just picking up the medical marijuana from the dispensary and having it in their car, and that might violate the company policy, which you can address as an employer as well.
Right. I mean, as I said, I think, and you made a very good point. I think, and this is across the board, not just in the context of medical marijuana either, but it's across the board. When you have individuals doing interviewing or recruiting for positions, you generally want to have well-trained individuals involved in that process, usually structured around the Human Resources Department or guided by or managed by the Human Resources Department, because those are the folks who are generally most well trained in the rules of what can and cannot be asked. But supervisors want to get involved in that process. That's great, but training is key. And I think where many employers get into trouble is they will have folks involved in the interviewing process who haven't been briefed by the HR group or who are asking questions that are maybe a little bit off script. You do want to have a process. You do want the supervisors, the HR people on the same page, asking the same questions, wanting to know the same information, and avoiding those topics, like medical history, like workers' compensation history, which can get you into legal trouble.
I want to touch a little bit too on remote workers, Carl, because you made a very good point. Every state is taking a different approach on this, and every state has its guidelines on both medical marijuana as well as recreational. So let's talk to the employers a little bit about how they should be handling that remote worker that might live in Colorado, or that remote worker that lives in New York or Illinois that has a much different directive on this topic.
Well, I mean, it really does depend on the state that the person is working in. So there are about 39 states right now that recognize some form of medical marijuana as legal. There are 19 states, some of the same 19 states, who are not only involved or recognize medical marijuana as legal, but also have some form of recreational use, which has been recognized as legal. So if you have a multi-state workforce, particularly people who are in a remote setting, not necessarily supervised on site, you have to be aware of what the rules and regulations are in those locations, and they're not going to be the same. A medical marijuana statute in Illinois is not necessarily the same as a medical marijuana statute in Ohio. Recreational use in Colorado may not necessarily be the same as recreational use in California or the state of Washington. So what you do, what you can test for, what you can regulate for as an employer will vary from state to state. So the first thing you need to do is figure out what states you're dealing with. Then you really need to have competent, qualified HR people and legal counsel in those states, or those who are qualified to address the laws of those states to advise you. And in most large-scale companies will have people in-house who do that. Smaller companies may not necessarily. So get the right, find out what states you're working on, get the right resources to help you with that. If you are, and then the third question is, in some cases, what an employer may do to respond to medical marijuana is different from state to state. So it may be legal in Illinois and it may be legal in Ohio, but the employer's rights in dealing with an employee with medical marijuana may be different. Ohio's maximum flexibility. Employers have a lot of room to maneuver, a lot of options in dealing with whether they want to or accommodate medical marijuana. But in places like Illinois, California, Colorado, that is not necessarily the case. So again, how you respond will vary from state to state as well. Now this creates a problem, right? Because if you're going to deal with somebody differently who has a medical marijuana license in Colorado than you deal with them here in Ohio, you've got an issue, an internal inconsistency problem. So you really want to be careful that if you are in a multi-state situation, you're dealing with employees in different jurisdictions subject to different laws, you try to navigate a policy or procedure that makes sense for everybody. And that's not very easy to do. And that's part of the reason why you need really competent, qualified HR support. You need competent, qualified legal counsel to steer you around those differences. But discrepancies and differences can create a labor relations issue, if not a legal one.
Yeah, and thank you, because that's kind of where the direction I wanted to go on is that, again, we put a lot of emphasis on training on this show. And this is a great topic that tends to get kind of pushed off to the side because we don't, a problem's never a problem until it is a problem, right? We've all heard that.
Right.
So let's go into the next easy slide of this conversation is reasonable suspicion, because that's when we're talking about communication and training of our supervisors, one of the biggest things on this topic that we need to be very sure of is that they know when to challenge an individual that they believe to be on marijuana or anything else. And that's called reasonable suspicion. So Carl, walk us through what reasonable suspicion is and how that can be exercised.
Sure. So reasonable suspicion is the idea that an employer, supervisor, a coworker has uncovered something, seen something, observed something, knows of something that would give rise to suspicion that that individual is impaired. is under the influence of some substance, marijuana, cocaine, alcohol, whatever. So for example, the obvious situation is you're sitting in the lunchroom, somebody pulls out a joint and starts smoking it. You now have that's not just reasonable suspicion, that's pretty darn good evidence that the person is using marijuana, right? That's the obvious case. But what if you've got somebody who is working in the workplace and you see them swaying and tipping as they're walking down the aisle, apparently under the influence? You don't know if it's alcohol, you don't know if it's anything. It could be a medical problem, we don't know. But it's behavior that seems unusual and seems affected in some way. That could give rise to reasonable suspicion. And if you have a reasonable suspicion, drug testing policy could trigger sending that person for a test. There are other ways reasonable suspicion can arise. You have somebody whose attendance record is now suddenly gone off the deep end. You know, they've been a consistent, very reliable person over time. For whatever reason, now they suddenly are not showing up to work. They're coming in late on a regular basis. Their behavior is unusual, and under circumstances which would suggest this is not something that is just, you know, related to an unusual or isolated incident. That could give rise to reasonable suspicion. So, and the people who are doing the reasonable suspicion assessments are usually the first line supervisors. Sometimes they're coworkers who are observing something and then reporting it to the first line supervisors. Reasonable suspicion does not always require that the supervisor personally observe. This is a common mistake. Reasonable suspicion can be based upon a report or some other coworker report, and that could, under certain circumstances, give rise to a supervisor saying, "Hey, we need to get this person tested." So it can come up in a variety of different ways, but it's designed to allow the employer to, you know, observe behaviors, and if there's some concern, send that person for a test. And so there's no really good one-size-fits-all definition of reasonable suspicion. A lot of it is common sense, but it is also one of the ways that employers have utilized testing in the workplace, and a very important part of that.
Carl, that's fantastic. I thought I was going to throw you a side kick or a side ball, and you had no problem. You knew exactly. Maybe we've been working together so long, you just know how my mind works. But great points to remind our viewers and our employers. So let's kind of back up and start from the beginning. Before you, as an employer, before a business really takes a stance on whether you're going to start considering medical marijuana or even eliminating the marijuana portion of your drug testing process for pre-employment, take a good hard look. Listen to what Carl said. Take those 3 steps. Think about the positions that you're employing, the types of responsibilities and safety issues that you have to take into consideration. Always be cognizant of your state laws. Be thinking about whether you have federal contracts or the type of clients that you have and what their policies may be. Remember, you want to be cognizant if your employees are going on site to other companies. They may have their own policies that you need to be aware of. So be asking all these questions before you start changing your policy. And then don't forget to change your policy if you're going to make a decision in regards to this either way. Medical marijuana, recreational marijuana, it's not going away. It's not going away. And to Carl's point, it's just going to become more prevalent as a part of the conversation of employment and labor, whether you're here in Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, or Wyoming and Arkansas. It's a conversation that as an HR person or a decision maker for the company, you need to be aware. And then the last major lesson I want you to take away from what Carl said is get those partnerships within your management team and communicate and train. Because again, he brought up a very, very good point. Your frontline supervisors, as we have said a million times on this show, they're the ones who know what's going on. They see it, they hear it, they're dealing with it. And as representatives of your company, they need to know how to react to these circumstances and when to partner. with either the HR person or the owners. So Carl, thank you so very, very much. Are there any last points I forgot to wrap up on?
No, as usual, I think you covered it. Thanks so much for having me.
You've trained me well. Viewers, I want you to know that Carl's going to be back in September. We're going to start a series here next month on how to work with international employees. We all know it's coming. We all know it's coming with the influx of immigrants coming into this country. We are already here in this particular market outside of Cincinnati. We are already seeing the impacts of some of these workers and how all the different policies and procedures and processes that need to be changed or adjusted or altered to accommodate these workers. Because again, here's another big change in the employment setting, and it's not going to go away. So put it on your calendar now that you will not want to miss this series. And Carl's going to be with us in September to talk about that from an OSHA and safety perspective. So Carl, thank you. Thank you very, very much. If you would like to talk to Carl, he is a partner at Sibley, Shillitoe & Dyer here in Cincinnati. What's your email, Carl?
Kulrich, so Kulrich at ssdlaw.com.
And trust me, the station knows him very, very well. So if you didn't get that email, you can always send a message to ICRC-TV and they will make sure that Carl gets it, or send it to me. But yeah, Carl's always available for any questions. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So
excellent.
With all those points brought up.
Yeah, good stuff.
Well, and you know, again, it's one thing to start wanting to compromise and maybe bend some of our rules just to obtain, and I hate to say it, but sometimes just to obtain a warm body.
Yeah.
To fulfill the role. But now we've got another major, and I call it noise. We've got all this noise now coming up from a political perspective called the critical race theory.
Oh, yes.
And the news is loaded with it in regards to attacking the educational system and the different educational processes that this is influencing. But you and I are starting to see it make an impact in the workplace.
Oh, without a doubt. And I will tell you right now, whatever you see in the news today will be in your workplace tomorrow. That is true of everything. Hurricanes, Black Lives Matter, immigration, And if there's one thing that maybe woke America up a little bit was the 2008 crash. And we discovered how valuable labor was. It's like we seem to forget this, okay? And then now we've got COVID and we've spent trillions of dollars in bailouts and assistance and things like this, and more coming and things like that. But I got news for you. That's labor. That's labor. And let me just lay the foundation here a little bit. And yeah, I'm getting a lot of interviews and a lot of podcasts and radio shows and things on the critical race theory. Because, I mean, first of all, you wouldn't think, right? Okay, I'm white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, straight male. But I just got my book that came out, Tolerance and Diversity for White Guys and Other Human Beings. And what it is, it's a no-blame approach to the problems that we're having regarding diversity. Now, freeze right there. There are all kinds of opinions on what is wrong in the world today and what's wrong with our American institutions and things like this. When you hear somebody use the term critical race theory, and all you have to do is go on MSN, go to Google, Yahoo, turn on any evening news, and there is some school board meeting somewhere or some state legislator exploding with this. Okay, well, let's cut through it here just a little bit. When I say critical race theory, that is a broad brush, okay? That's like saying, okay, Pandy, we're going to talk about sports. Okay, what's your favorite? Cricket? You know, what are we going to talk about? I mean, is there soccer? Is there, I don't even know how many sports are. There are people who believe chess is a sport. Okay, whatever. But that's the thing is when we look at critical race theory, and that's one thing we're going to look at a little bit in here today, there are some aspects of critical race theory that are right on point. And let me just give you one: implicit bias. Now, here's where you would get some critical race theory people saying that, you know, white male officers have to work on their implicit bias. White people have to work on their implicit bias. You know, I hear the term white people are oppressors. Okay, let me cut through this. We're all human. Okay, whatever you blame one person for in the terms of implicit bias, it will be on someone else too. We're all human. And I like to look at a neurological approach. We're all the same. Okay, and so let's just look at implicit bias. Everybody's got it. And if we could all focus, and instead of fighting, and if we could all focus on that, and if we could all work to eliminate our implicit biases, which is very doable, 90% of all your problems in this area would go away. Okay, that's just one example. But hiring, we're talking about hiring today, right? Okay, I have clients now. Okay, there are people, and again, there's disagreement within the critical race theory people. Critical race people blame the liberals for selling them out, and they blame the conservatives for selling them out. So you see, you got all these factions. Hiring. Some critical race theory people say that our legal systems are basically full of white privilege. And even then, legal systems, what do you mean? Do you mean police officers? Do you mean the civil courts? Do you mean the criminal courts? Do you mean probate? What do you mean? And so you see, it gets a little blurry there. But one aspect is that basically the rules need to be, whether rewritten or reinterpreted, reestablished, to favor people who are minorities. And there's critical race theory for Hispanics. There's critical race theory for sexual orientation, and of course for African Americans or blacks. So give you an example right now. I've got a large client. I went in and they are getting a lot of pressure from the board to become more inclusive. Okay. They want to increase their number of minorities by the end of this year. Now, you and I have talked about this, and
Hear it all the time. Hear it all the time.
You know, my solution as a 40-year HR guy and a 25-year employment attorney, you throw a wide net. Okay, so that means that you're going to try to catch as many fish as you can. And so if you happen to be in the Cincinnati area, then you would be running ads in newspapers that are marketed to Hispanics, to the gay community, to the African American community, or whatever. And here's my thing. If you have a glass jar full of marbles, and there's 100 marbles, 50 of them are white, okay? 30 of them are brown, and 20 of them are black. Mix them all up. If you grab a big handful, what are the chances they're all going to be white? Okay, so that gets the implicit bias and everything. But I tell you, this company right now says they're going to set quotas. You have to hire so many black people, so many minorities, so many Hispanics by the end of this year. That is blatantly illegal, and they're going to do it anyway.
Well, and Scott, we're talking about, and our viewers are small businesses of 4 and 5, all the way up to hundreds of employees. And I don't care what size of company you are, this is just not something that we have a lot of time and a lot of energy to put into, knowing that we've got all these other aspects of employment that we have to be keeping track of. And let's go back over. Employment is what percentage of an individual's business budget?
I'll tell you right now. And I'm doing this with a company right now. I get this from CFO Magazine, Fortune, Forbes, business strategy, financial publications. Usually 60 to 70%. Now, and I have never in my life ever run across a CFO who had it correct. And it's not the CFO's fault. General accounting principles go back over 100 years. And so the definition, what is the cost of labor? Whatever goes into the cost of attracting and retaining employees. So all those ads you run, that's a cost of labor. Uniforms, that's a cost of labor, okay? Safety equipment for an individual, because I got a person, It's something I need to buy for that person to do their job to attract and retain. That's a cost of labor. Private office space is a cost of labor, which we're discovering now with COVID because of all the people who were thinking, well, maybe I can save a lot of money because I don't have to pay $15 a square inch for, this place or something like that. So when you start calculating anything that goes into the cost of attracting and retaining people, it is by far the biggest cost of any organization. And I will tell you right now, I got clients rethinking this. I would rather see you buy the wrong truck. I would rather see you buy the wrong whatever. And imagine this, somebody's going to buy the wrong truck, and that's a $30,000 investment, let's say, or a copier. An every old copier. Say you spent $20,000 on this great copier. You're going to research it. You're going to do all this stuff. And then we hire somebody who's maybe making $15 an hour. So that's $30,000 a year. Okay. Plus family coverage, which you can tack on another 15 grand right there. So now you're up to about 45,000, taxes and everything up. You're up to 60 grand for one person. And we basically bring somebody in, talk to them for 20 minutes, and then hire them. That's no. And I'll tell you, this is the thing that really gets me. I'm running into more and more employers. They are just happy to get somebody who is good. The baby boomers are retiring. And I'll tell you all this stuff about the $300 extra a week that people are getting on their employment. Okay, that's a factor. But I'll tell you the biggest factor right now, there are not enough Gen Yers and Gen Zers alive to replace the baby boomers who are either dying or retiring. They don't exist. And so, to actually bow to political pressure, because that's what's happening right now and what is being taught in diversity programs. CBS News, I'll tell you, and this is part of critical race theory, CBS News did a phenomenal study, found that 69% of all the law enforcement agencies in this country have done some sort of diversity or tolerance training. Okay. The vast majority of those were miserable failures because the trainer brought in all of the white police officers and told them basically that they are all bigots and they have biases against people of color.
That's, I'm going to stop you right there because that's a really, really good point. I think that needs to, if we're going to talk about impartial bias, I think we need to really kind of put some emphasis on this. If you as a business owner or an HR representative want to approach this for your company, you really need to be looking at those training programs and you really need to be looking at the overall, you determine what outcome you want before you even choose that training program. Sit down and actually talk with your business owners or your C-levels and say, look, what do we want to see come out of this? And then back into your training program, because I was in a recent, I'm doing all these certifications for mediation and arbitration.
Yeah.
That was a part of our program as well. And Scott, I have to be truthful. It was unbelievable. Out of over 50 participants in this class, and of course it was all Zoom, the percentage of people that actually stayed engaged and had their camera on showing interest in what she was saying was there was 12 or 15 of us. Everybody else totally blacked out their screen. We didn't know whether they were eating lunch or yard or took off for a drink. They had no clue. And that's not an effective program. That is not an effective program. So let's talk about the impact of choosing the wrong program. Because if we go back and let's say, yes, we want to have a quota and they're going to cross that horrible line. Think about the impact of putting in a program and then not holding your people responsible or accountable for it, or putting in the wrong program, holding them accountable for the wrong things.
Oh, you are absolutely right. And that's one of the things to think about. And I think political pressure, for whatever reason, can ruin your culture.
Yeah.
Okay? When I say political pressure, we're going to do something that we know is wrong, but I'm going to go along with it because of peer pressure, because of, whatever. Okay. Your culture. This is nothing fuzzy at all. Okay. And I define culture as very simple. Okay. Is it safe? That's it. I am not a big believer in, actually, it's funny, a university here in Ohio is working on a There's a young woman working on her doctoral thesis, and it's on employee surveys. She wanted to know what I thought of employee surveys. And I said, why bother?
Mhm.
You know, I mean, depends on what you're looking for. You're looking for their opinions on benefits or something. But an employee satisfaction survey, why don't you just go sit down and talk to them and ask them? And I always hear the same thing. It's like, well, they won't tell us the truth. That's your survey right there.
There you go.
Okay? So, you know, here you go. So, okay, all these mottos, we care about our people. We care about our, okay, really. So let me get this straight. Now, we care about our people, but your practice of recruiting people, let's just say, is blatantly illegal. You know it's illegal. Everybody knows it's illegal. And you are going to hire people who are not qualified for the job just because of their race, religion, or something like this. And then you're going to bring these folks in. And now, okay, so now what are you thinking as maybe a white person? You're thinking, is this person going to be promoted over top of me to make the numbers look good? Now, understand too, I get a lot of pushback on this, actually also from a lot of Black individuals that say they hate these quota programs. Okay, they hate them and they're illegal. I mean, the United States Supreme Court has ruled that they are unconstitutional, and they've ruled that more than once. But now I talk to people who are very qualified in what they do. They're African American or Black or both. And they'll say, well, you know, people think I just got this job because I was Black. And it isn't true. The person is very qualified. So this sword swings two ways in that, okay, I'm going to hire and honestly, I probably shouldn't mention their name, but a large national human resource organization. I was at one of their national diversity conferences once, and the speaker got up and professed to do just that. That no, what you do is you sit, and if the managers do not hire enough Black employees, like 20%, 30% by the end of the year, you cut their pay. That could not be more illegal. No, that's a problem.
Let's go even further. When they do that, and again, we know so many cases where they're going to put these quotas in and they're going to start targeting, and but when they do that kind of thing, they also have the strong possibility of setting the individual up for failure.
Oh, yeah.
Individual is not qualified for the position. If the needs of the business, if the competencies and skill sets needed for the role are not addressed and are not a priority, then that individual goes into that role, and not only do they not succeed, but they also become alienated with
right.
the rest of the company, because everybody's looking at it and going, well, you dropped the ball, or why didn't you do this, or well, don't give it to her because we have to do her work for her because she didn't know what she's doing.
Right.
It's
right.
devastating to the individual. Our customers even know it. Trust me, your clients and customers will know if the people that you have working for you are competent or not, because they're depending on them.
So,
and
quality
and standards are based on that individual's performance. So this can be extremely devastating. And I'm going to kill you. My definition of culture. My definition of culture is what somebody says about the company in their personal time.
Right.
So what our employees tell their friends, what our employees tell, even our competitors, and how many people they can refer into, and bring employees into the company. That says volumes of what culture is. And it's amazing. Just ask the employees to make referrals in a diverse or in a very inclusive manner. You'd be surprised how many of them will come up with people, again, because they know what's needed for the role, and they know who the skill set.
Yeah, you're hitting it right on the head. And here's what I want people to say. It is safe to work here and be Black.
Exactly.
It's safe to be Jewish. It's safe to be white. It's safe for all people. I agree. We need to make sure that we are hiring the best person for the job, and that also developing people, white, Black, Jewish, Indian, Pakistani. I don't care. I want a good person. They're all humans. But when you start saying, I'm going to give preference to this person over here because they're white, you and I should get as upset and angry over that as anyone who was just shorted out of the position because they're black, because that's that boomerang bigotry that I like to talk about, in that if I see somebody discriminate against someone because they're black, I should be enraged. I should be absolutely enraged by that, because what that black person is now going to do, they've seen a white guy do this to him. He is now going to throw that boomerang at somebody else and it's going to hit somebody white. And I'll tell you, I thought about this morning when we were at breakfast. We were out at breakfast, my wife and I, and there are these two adorable little black kids. They couldn't be over 2 or 3 years old, brother and sister. And the mom was there with them and everything. And I remember thinking about this because I had this show later today. And the little boy just waves and goes, "Hi." And I was like, "Oh, hi, how you doing?" Gave him 5 and everything. Because in my mind, I don't ever want him to have a bad experience with someone who's white. Because if he does, that boomerang will come back and hit somebody else later, and on and on and on. We absolutely have to get rid of our implicit biases. And I can tell you, quick test. Do you have an implicit bias somewhere? Okay. Have you ever slept in the fetal position? Where did you get? Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Where did you get that idea? We have subconscious memories from in the womb. We have subconscious memories that are telling you to do 90% of what you do all day long. And if you go to my website, scottwarwick.com, and click on the white guy's book icon, underneath there is all kinds of videos on this to watch for free. But there's also the IAT test from Harvard, okay? It's an assessment tool that you can go in and you can test and you can discover not if you have subconscious biases, but where they are and how bad you are and what you have to do to improve, to get rid of those. So I'll tell you right now, we are going to have illegal hiring. We are going to have protests. We are going to have people screaming critical race theory, people screaming against the critical race theory. Throw all that off the table. What do we have to do? Get rid of our implicit biases, hire the best person who will make your business successful.
And I'm going to add one more thing and kind of swing you in a different direction.
Sure.
What we're trying to do, viewers, is give you some talking points, because this has to be open conversation. We cannot, whether you're the employee or the employer, you cannot sit by and stay quiet on this.
Mm-mm. You
should feel totally comfortable going and talking about this conversation with your employer or your employees. Look, this is important. This is a world issue now, a world issue. And we want to, like Scott said, we want to make sure that being employed here in the United States is a safe and secure place. We've talked about that over and over again as one of our goals as employers and businesses here. But as individuals, we should have open dialogue and talk about what this means. What does your culture mean? What can you do to help improve the culture and the diversity or the inclusion of some of the decisions that are being made in your company? If you aren't having those kind of conversations, whether it's with your department leads or your business owners, I would strongly encourage it. I had an individual who sent me a policy. I was telling Scott, she sent me a policy where she was adding language to the EEOC policy because she felt that, again, just from talking to some of the employees, she felt like she needed to make a company statement on the whole topic. And after we actually started talking about it, she realized, oh my gosh, I didn't really need to do that, did I? Because she was taking sound bites and quotes from the newspapers and from Facebook and different places and trying to Google and trying to put it all into their company policy. And she, after we started talking about it, she goes, oh my gosh, I really messed it up. I really need to keep it as simple as possible. We don't discriminate.
Yeah, period.
Boom.
Against anybody.
Those got it all figured out, guys. They have it all figured out. That language is great language.
It is.
So be
Yeah.
very, very careful. This is, Scott, too, this is one of those topics where I really want to encourage, if you are a decision maker, if you are a business owner or a sense of authority for the company, and you aren't real sure about how to approach this, please go and talk to your legal attorney. Please talk to your HR consultant, and not the diversity inclusion consultant. This is a labor law topic. Get your compliance and regulatory consultant and talk to them about where you are, what you want to, again, what's the end game? What are you trying to work towards? Call Scott, go to his website. Carl will even talk to you about this topic, but this is something that you need to partner with someone who knows much more about this topic, because if you aren't getting that conversation right now, I'm telling you, you will.
Yeah.
You absolutely will. I had a client here the other day who did some interviewing for a clerical position, and so help me, an individual who did not have the skill sets required, and it was posted right in the job description that was handed. She was turned down, and she came right back and pulled the race card. And they called me right away and said, "Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? She's going to sue us." I said, "How can she sue you? You offered the job to another Black woman. So how can you get sued?" She's just upset. It's emotion right now.
Yeah.
And that's just where we are in our world. There's so much emotion, but as decision makers in the company, you have to know how to weed through that emotion and understand that your decisions and what you do with the company have a huge impact on not only the culture, but also the liability and risk that the company takes. Scott, what else have is there, what last words do you have for our viewers on this topic?
I just want to expound on what you just said. Absolutely. Call your HR person, bounce some ideas around. And I will tell you right now, I have been doing diversity training for 20 years. Okay. And for the last 11 years, I've been writing down what I say in basically seminars. So let me tell you right now, I have been to 30 plus diversity conferences in the last 20 years. Absolutely. I can count, in my personal opinion, I can count probably on one or two hands the number of diversity, quote, quote, experts who I respect. Okay. And here's what I mean by that. Okay. I've never been to a diversity conference where you have not been taught to do something illegal. That's the first thing that's got to go. Second, I have never been to a diversity conference where some speaker didn't get up and attack white people. Now, I know a lot of white people, but this is like saying, I like white people. You got to be freaking kidding me. Have you met them? I mean, some of them are wonderful people and some of them are dumb as dirt. Okay. So just because of your skin color, I mean, that's actually a kind of a racist thing to say anyway. No, look, diversity means anything that makes you different. And I'm really proud of the book. Well, of our launch, we tried to hit one category with the Tolerance and Diversity for White Guys book, one category for bestseller status. We tried to win one category on Amazon. We won 13. Okay. But I'll tell you, here's the kicker. There is not one category out there for books and rankings that is just diversity or just tolerance or just inclusion. All the book world, the publishing world only recognizes diversity as being for minorities.
Wow.
Yeah. We won minority studies, we won race relations, we won religious studies, did all those types of things. But there is nothing out there that is just diversity. Everything for tolerance and diversity topics is all about minorities in some way. Religion or sexual orientation, it's all about minorities. And I will tell you right now, that alienates white people. I don't want to alienate anybody, and you shouldn't either. This is for humans. We are going to include white people. We're going to include Indians. We're going to include Native Americans, Black people, everybody, because we're all human. So the traditional diversity advice that you get from some of the top, we just mentioned, White Fragility, a phenomenal New York Times best-selling book. I read the book. If they made one little change, I would love it. And if they just called it human fragility. White fragility. Oh, you bad white people. Yeah, you're just as bad over there. You're doing the same thing. So it's like, actually, don't you get it? Here's like, oh, you white people have to do that. Does anybody see the racism in that?
Yeah. And again, I want to put the emphasis on the implicit bias. If you haven't had an opportunity to do that with your team, I would highly recommend you doing that with your senior level team. Get them understanding the importance of identifying that, then work it down through your officers, your directors, your managers, your supervisors, then down to your frontline supervisors where the real activity is going on. Remember, this has an impact on your hiring. It has an impact on who gets promoted, who gets increases, how people were included in projects. It goes on and on and on and on, and it's happening. I don't care where you're working. I don't care what industry you're in. I don't care who, you could have all family members, and there's implicit bias being in there.
Yes.
This has been such a great topic. I really,
Oh, goes fast, doesn't it?
I just love it. Listen, Scott Warwick, you've got his information. Please don't hesitate. Go to his website, check out his material, but most of all, call him if you have a question and buy his book. Buy his book. Well, I want to thank ICRC-TV for one more hour. Again, this is such a blessing and we really appreciate it. Send in your questions. The topics that we talk about are all driven by you, the viewer. So thank you. My name is Pandy Pridemore, Principal Consultant with Human Resource USA. We'll see you next month.